You're welcome.
Okay. Ooh, it snowed today. It's a nice Friday night.
Yeah, I was looking out the window and it's still going hard here.
Oh wow. I don't know if it's, well, I can't tell. It doesn't seem to stick.
Snowing
But hi
over-
everyone.
Yeah, snowing up here.
Oh my God. I'm
Yeah, we're
sorry.
supposed to get, I don't know what you guys are getting in DC. We're supposed to get 5 or 6 inches over here on the Eastern Shore.
Well, we're getting a
Oh, this way you're in
little
like Maryland,
bit-
right?
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
a little
about
bit of
90
snow.
minutes from them.
All right.
I hate
Well,
winter. I can't tolerate winter.
a minute. We'll let some more people file in and then we can start the event. But everyone who's here, get into your favorite cozy clothes and put some get your spooky vibes on because we're about to talk about Devil House.
Wait, are we waiting on me? No.
Oh no. I was just waiting for more people to file in. But I think it's 8:00. Yeah, it's 8:02 and I think it's a good time as any to start. So, good evening everyone. My name is Isa and I am a bookseller at Politics and Prose Bookstore and I'll be your host for this evening. And I'd like to welcome all of you to PNP Live. Thank you for joining us in this virtual format amidst these extraordinary times, throughout all of which we strive to continue to bring you the authors you love and their new books to our Politics and Prose community. We were also excited to have our guests here with us tonight in person, but alas, we must keep everyone's safety our top priority. Hopefully, we'll all be able to gather around and hang out soon. Fingers crossed. At any point during the event, you can click on the link in the chat to purchase Devil House by John Darnielle. As you can see, Politics and Prose has some signed copies. And additionally, you can ask the author a question by clicking on Q&A, which can be found near the bottom of your screen. And while we'll try to get to everyone's questions after this presentation, we apologize in advance if we don't have time to address yours. Finally, we want to thank you for being here with us tonight. We're so thankful for our community of loyal customers and friends for keeping our spirits afloat. And it is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. John Darnielle is the author of Wolf in White Van, a New York Times bestseller, a National Book Award nominee, and a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize for First Fiction. His novel, Universal Harvester, was also a New York Times bestseller and was a finalist for the Locus Award. He is the writer, composer, guitarist, and vocalist for the band The Mountain Goats, and he currently lives in Durham, North Carolina with his wife and sons. John will be in conversation tonight with Casey Sepp, who is a staff writer at The New Yorker and the author of Furious Hours, the Murder, Fraud, and the Last Trial of Harper Lee, which was a New York Times bestseller and named one of the best books of 2019 by The Washington Post, The Economist, Time Magazine, and President Barack Obama. She lives on the Eastern Shore of Maryland with her family. So, friends, it is my absolute honor to introduce John and Casey to PNP Live. Have a good night.
Thanks a lot. It's a lot of fun to be here with John, and we were just taking a minute beforehand to congratulate the booksellers and the whole staff at Politics and Prose for unionizing. And you have a lot of choices of where you can buy John's book. Basically any retailer in the country, anybody on planet Earth will sell you this book, but we really hope you'll buy it from Politics and Prose because they're becoming a union shop, and it's a really exciting time for them. And one of the best ways to show your support is just to be here. And I know John's going to start us off with a reading from Devil House. So hopefully if you've got the book in front of you, you can follow along liturgical style or just listen. Actually, I see he's left his screen. He's grabbing the book. I'm supposed to warn you, you might enjoy an intermission with us. You'll have time to get a coffee, fill up your glass of wine, do whatever you need to. John, he's got his coffee grounds. He's trying to caffeinate to build up, enough excitement and energy for us all tonight. But he's going to start with a
wait to brew the coffee until I've done the reading part.
All right. He's going to read to us from this beautiful, complicated book that I really love and that I'm looking forward to just learning a lot more about tonight. So if you've already read it, probably you're equipped with questions. But if you just love John's work or you want to learn more, there is a space to do the Q&A. And at a certain point, I'll look at those questions. So feel free to populate that. And in the meantime, just enjoy the reading, enjoy the conversation. And thanks for being with us. It's a lot of fun to celebrate this brilliant writer and this just incredibly talented guy. So John, why don't you tell us what you're going to read and get started?
So I never pick what I'm going to read until right before I do. And then I have some neuroses about, if you've seen my band play, often you'll find us doing a lot of different songs from night to night, even in consecutive cities, because I have a bunch of weird neurotic ideas about varying it up. But the extract I read the other night, as I'm leafing through, is like, I sort of want to read it again. I hope that's okay. It's from part 6 of the book. We can talk about this later, but the structure of the book is that parts 1 and 7 are the first person, parts 2 and 6 are in the second person, parts 3 and 5 are in the third person, then part 4 is kind of discrete. So the 6th part is a letter, is the author of a book that was written about a murder case, addressing someone who wrote a letter to him and summarizing the contents of that letter and sometimes responding to it. Her name is Jana Perez, and her son was murdered. And she's talking about having to go down to the station to identify her son's remains. And he's describing reading her letter about that. The first circle of hell was the process. It was clear to you that procedures were the most important thing to the police, but they weren't the most important thing to you. What was important to you was why they had asked you to come talk to them, why they were asking about Gene Cupp's car, and what did they know about where Jesse had been all night and where he was now. We think we have a lead on where he went was as direct an answer as you got from either of the detectives at first. They kept finding ways to not answer you directly. It made you feel like they thought you were stupid and couldn't see what they were doing, which was something you were used to in your everyday life, but had the effect now of increasing your agitation a little with each passing moment, of deepening the reserve of dread whose membranous confines, you thought, surely would not be problems in school. Did he have close friends? And if he did, what kind of people were they? And if he didn't really have friends, how did he like to spend his free time? What was his life like at home? Had he met anybody new lately? Maybe somebody he'd been spending a lot of time with? Had he been acting strangely, or had anything unusual at all happened? Some change in his routine? Anything out of the ordinary? It felt like they would never stop. Like they would never run out of new ways to ask the same questions, one officer taking notes while the other nodded as you answered, offering a little assurance now and then as they walked you through the paces, each step of which felt like an endless, barren expanse, even if everybody was being nice enough, treating you with kid gloves, you realized, when clarity finally came. Clarity came in the form of Jesse's necklace, a silver chain with a tear-shaped turquoise chip dangling from the middle. He wore it every day. His father hated it and made cruel remarks about it and made ugly insinuations about who might have bought it for him and why. You liked Jesse's necklace. It looked good on him. And when he wore it, you felt like you were catching a glimpse of how he might carry himself when he was all grown up, when he became his own man at last, walking around in the world on his own. It was in a plastic bag now, on a table in front of you, alongside a paper tag with some numbers written on it. Does this belong to your son? Detective Haney asked, and you put your hand over your mouth and screamed through your fingers and felt in that moment like the best possibility available to you would be to just keep screaming and never stop, to produce a scream so great that it enveloped and consumed the evidence bag and the officer holding it out to you, and the land and the sea and the sky, to scream and scream until the screaming somehow killed you. Because if you stopped, worse things than any of these would be waiting out there in the quiet, the rapidly gathering quiet that palpably stood ready to open up for you like a dark, endless cave from which you would never be free.
Gosh, I mean, that's just incredible, John. And you alluded to this before you started. It's like, first of all, just hard to pull off the second person, but this is a novel where you move through first person, second person, third person. You've got all sorts of other interesting aesthetic shifts, and just, it's a really dynamic novel, really complicated one. And I wonder if you can just kind of talk us through some of those stylistic decisions. You know, did you have a structure in mind? Did these creative choices emerge, or kind of how much planning went into it versus improvisation as you were writing through the story?
Well, I sort of started with the structure. I knew I wanted to write about a building, and I started asking myself questions about how to reflect that a building is sort of the main character in a way, you know. And I thought, well, a building has a structure, right? And I'm not an architect. I have no math skills, right? And but I thought, well, one of the chief characteristics of structures is symmetry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm Catholic, not practicing, but you never shed your symmetry fetish if you're Catholic, right? And so I thought about that, and I knew I wanted it to be a big book. I wanted to go someplace, you know. And I think there's a million ways to write books, but one way is a straight line, and another way is a circle, and another way is a structure, you know. And like, I think like trollop books is like having a structure, you know. And that was sort of what I was interested in doing. So I said, well, if I was to write a big book, what would I do? And I knew I didn't want to just do one that started here. You know, I don't want to name any writers because there's some writers who do this really great, but you know, well, Dickens has a bunch of wheels inside of them, but it tends to be starts here, goes here, right? And maybe it goes to all kinds of cool places, and he's a master, so he knows what he's doing, but that's what's up. Where if you read a Virginia Woolf book, on the other hand, you have all these concentric circles nested inside one another, and some of them spiral out and come back in, and maybe it winds up over here. And I was asking myself questions about what would a big book look like. And I said, well, what if it had a mirror structure, right? And that was the first question that interested me before I had anything in mind. Was like, well, how would a mirror work, right? Well, you could have it in perfect symmetry, so each part just echoed one another. But then I didn't like that. I wanted something in the middle to disrupt it, to stand in the middle. So those were the first questions I asked, right? Before I had a theme, and I was just sort of kicking around in my head. And then I had this idea for a building that was near where I used to have an office, and the building was no longer there. And I was thinking about the absence of this building and what it had been before. And then I just started writing. So I sort of like began with some very abstract ideas. And then I wrote the first chapter sort of as an improv, you know. And then I started asking myself questions about what follows from this idea of a guy who's talking to his mom, who thinks he's going to come back from where he is, but he's not.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear that idea of like the architecture kind of inspiring you. I was thinking of Brideshead Revisited or Fall of the House of Usher. Like, there are just so many models for moving in those spaces, and it's really interesting to think of kind of letting that architecture dictate the narrative architecture too. And you know, I don't want to undersell it. Like, I think people are now like kind of thinking like there's some kind of villanelle going on. It's just like a very human novel. You could read it and never realize kind of the journey you're on formally, except for I think one choice, which is like, you got to let people know you also do some cool stuff with fonts, right?
Yes,
like we're not just changing like the person who's talking to us, because your earlier novels did that too. You moved from, you know, different kinds of narration, or you mess with chronology, but like this one's really just like, it drills down all the different ways. You know, it would be like, you're talking about Wolf, like, it would be as if the waves actually had like different fonts for every character, and their dialogue was like color coded, or like what Faulkner wanted to do with The Sound and the Fury. So, I mean, just revel in it for a minute. Tell us about some of, you know, like, did you like write it and then you went back and changed the font, or how did
I wrote
happen?
So you're talking about this middle section. One of the things about our narrator, Gage Chandler, is that his mother told him he was descended from kings, right? And another thing about the story he's writing is that it turns on this legal precept of castle doctrine, that your home, and this is usually a legal concept these days, deployed by NRA assholes to defend people who shoot someone who's on their property, right? But the law is very old. The law was invented to say that, look, if a king, once you set foot inside the king's castle, he gets to kill you if he wants. It's his house, right? And I was thinking about this. I was thinking about castles, right? And I was thinking about genealogies, which I don't do genealogy at all. I'm always a little weirded out by people who do, and so I started with a character whose mom has told him that, oh, no, you're descended from this king, an ancient king, right? And I started looking into the ancient kings because I've always been into medieval stuff. And one thing I learned was that the castle doesn't come to England until after the Norman invasion, right? But the myths of King Arthur are said to have taken place long before the Norman invasion, before 1066, right? Well, but if the castle doesn't come until after Arthur, then where does Arthur live? What kind of building is he in, right? I was very interested in this, because when I say King Arthur, when I say Merlin, when I say Lancelot, Galahad, you see these people and you see the court that they're in, and you see how they're living, but it's a myth, right? But you knew it was a myth, but you didn't think that their house itself was like also involved. I was very interested in all this. But also when you mention structure as an abstract thing, it is, but it's not, right? To me as a songwriter, right, I know that when you talk about structure, nobody cries, right? Nobody gets, maybe some people do, and those would be people I would worship, but the thing is like, nobody cries about the structure, but the structure is part of what actually gets you, right?
Sure.
It's like, this is also a Catholic point, right? Is that without the structure, the needle that lands in the last, when you bring the chorus back around for a repeat, and you've already bought into the chorus, it's already kind of reaching you, and then it goes into a final bridge, and a songwriter says something again, and you think, my God, it landed on me so much harder when you said it for the fourth time. That's a structural question, right? I feel like structures have a lot more emotional weight than we tend to assign to them, because we're very post-romantic. We think that the only thing that can make me feel something is something that's talking directly about my feelings. But I think there's more to it than that,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in some ways that makes me wonder, so you're talking about this narrator, you mentioned Chandler, and
I should also say, I get lost when I'm talking. And once I've wandered as far away from the subject as you can stand, you should not hesitate to just jump in and go, yeah, no, that's fascinating. We're not really talking about that.
No, I mean, I'm refraining from asking you to perform the Anglo-Saxons here. Like, that's what's actually happening in my mind, is like, you're talking about the Norman invasion, and I feel like I want everybody to enjoy a song of yours that I really love. But what I actually wanted to know, because this is so complicated and you're managing so many different levels of structure, Chandler in the book talks about how he always writes from an outline. He lives and dies by these, like he writes them on the floor, draws them on the walls. There's just this elaborate planning and outlining. And so I just wonder, I mean, give us a little bit of sense of your method. Like, is he talking the way you would talk about this? Like, if we'd walked into your home over the last few years when you were working on Devil House, would there have been a big outline on the wall, or like files strewn across the floor, or how does it work for you?
So I don't have this is probably uncharacteristic of the way I present, but I don't have a strict process. I don't believe in having, but I have habits, right? I have things I wind up doing, and I do have some OCD strange things that I sort of have to do around some things, but I've only written a few books, so I don't really have, that much. But when I wrote Wolf and White Van, first I started with nothing. I just start improvising, typing. And then once it's going somewhere, I know without an outline, I'm not going to wind up any place. So I type single sentence things with an outline. I settle on a really super arbitrary number of chapters, right? 12, whatever. And then I say, well, man, I'm trying to scroll through my files to see if I can find the wolf outline. I don't think I can. But it'll say, a man writes about his life and explains his job. That'd be the outline for chapter 1, right?
Oh, wow.
Chapter 2, someone from his job takes exception to something. These are all very malleable. I go and I fix them over time, right? And actually, these are big moments for me when I look at the outline. I go, okay, that's not going to work anymore. right? So, and I'll get married to something, you know, and then have to, and then, but that's great for me because then I can break it. And when you do that, when you go, okay, well, that fourth thing you were supposed to do, you can't do now, right? In the general outline, these are great moments. New outline. There, new. Here's 3 of the files I'm finding. New outline expanded. New outline. So let's have a look at new outline. What does that one say? Well, no, wait. Is that, which one is this? Oh yeah, here it is. This is Wolf and White Van. Chapter 1, Park. Sean goes to the park. He remembers his bloodthirsty childhood fantasies when his divorced family was moving around a lot. A young child has a conversation with him. He goes home and tells his visiting nurse that he is glad to be alive.
Yeah.
Right? So I have that. That's just a really loose motion. If you
Sure.
read chapter 1, it leaves you so much room to roam, but it also gives you a little space within which to work, right? I don't want him to go anyplace else. He's going to the park, he's going home, right? I need those sort of strictures then. For this one, because I wanted everything to have 7 chapters, I had all this mirror structure going on. I had a lot more stuff, like you asked about the house. I don't write on the walls or anything, but for part 3, get a piece of that so I can show people what happened. Part 3 has all these subsections with these titles. That one says, had they wanted gold, right? So first I gathered all of those and I wrote them all on little note cards that were about the size of this hotel thing, right? And I wrote those, so there would have been 7 of them for each chapter. So I had 49 of those, right? Then I got all the characters together and I wrote their names down on things, and I started assigning them because I didn't want any of them to go missing. You know, I didn't want to writing a chapter and then one. So it was I was sitting on the floor with 7 times 7, 49, right? With 49 cards for the titles, and then something like 100 more cards for characters and interlocking parts. It was really, really, I'm not good at math. I talk a good game about structure, but I don't understand it. So it was very intense. And once you get inside it, it's really great because you feel kind of insane, but within your own place, you feel like, oh no, if you were in here, you'd get it. It would be very clear to you. And it's like, it's a, you know, it's kind of a great way of believing in all your characters and your locales, you know,
Sure.
because at that point, like I would arrive at the office from home. I have a separate office where I write. And you look at all these cards and stuff that are in the drawer and you go, oh man, I don't even remember any of this from yesterday. And you spread them out and it's literally like getting back into a river, you know. It's like the second you engage it, it's just your complete life for the next 6 hours. You know, it is very, it's a great way to inhabit something.
Well, I feel like for people who haven't read the book, this makes it sound like quadratic equations or something that's like really hard to hold in your head. And I just want to reassure people, as a reader, you're just in it. You know, that's
I shoot for clarity. That's the thing when I'm talking
so
about the
human.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I'm talking about the book, the structure takes, it's hard work, but the whole point of writing is to elucidate and to clarify, right? And so, so talking about it tends to sound like I'm describing the stuff I like to read, which is fairly difficult. But no, I mean, when I'm writing, what I do, if I have any gifts, my main gift is for communication. And so it resolves on clarity, and the way it gets there is through a process that doesn't look at all clear when it's going on.
Totally. Dissertations will be written about your novels, but that's not what it feels like to read them. Like, it feels like reading a great novel, which, you know, so you just told us a little bit about your writing life, kind of where you do it, how you organize your time, how these sentences guide your work, the cue cards to help you kind of outline. You know, we just said the character's name is Chandler. One of his books comes from a Randall Jarrell poem. This is a very literary book, as are your others, as is your music. Tell us a little bit about your reading life. You know, what are you into? What are you inspired by? What are the books that went into writing this book?
You know, I wish I had a list of what I was reading. I mean, this took 5 years to write, so it's a lot of stuff. Although some of the books, like the research books, well, here, the first book that probably inspires it is Mort d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory, right? Which is where we get most of the Arthurian legends from. And I bought this at a used bookstore in Edinburgh, Scotland in like 2003 or 4. And it was a 19th century edition in hardback, right? And it sat on my shelf for a number of years. And then one day I looked at it and said, I'm going to read that, you know? And to me, that's a very exciting thing when you have a book that like has been waiting for its turn, and then you go, oh, it's time, you know? And it was so good. It's the weirdest book. It's very, people don't know how weird the Middle Ages are, but they're weird. And it's a very bizarre book, but it's very emotional. I get really, the Arthurian legends are sort of at this nexus of when allowing people, and especially men, to have feelings is becoming more of a thing. You know, that's also exciting in Greek literature when, you know, when Achilles allows himself to grieve. It's very exciting. You know? But one reason it's exciting is because these guys are otherwise not having emotions, right? And but in Morte d'Arthur, the knights have a number of really heavy moments of reflection. You know, and there's courtly love, but there's also, they're growing older. They're leaving the court behind at one point and going to see the Grail. And I was reading that. I read a book called The Warm Ouroboros by E.R. Edison, which is in a fake medieval kind of thing, like the center of my book. And I thought, you know, nobody does that anymore. You know, nobody really does that. And I know from studying Chaucer that I kind of have the ability to affect a medieval style, right? It's like it's just like it's just like a dialect. If you're able to say, you know, you learn to speak it studying Chaucer. So those went into it. But there's also a bunch of books about castles that I was reading. Most of the subheaders in that section I was showing you, I was reading about the history of castles and about the history of lost texts. I have because there's so many books from back then that don't exist anymore, that we only know of because somebody else mentions them, right? I have a classical studies background. To me, that's magic. When somebody says, oh, here's this amazing book and everybody's read it and it's by Ennius. Well, we don't have any books by Ennius. They're all gone. But Cicero thought Ennius was the greatest. And so the reason that we know Ennius existed is partly because Cicero kept quoting Ennius when he was delivering his legal arguments, right? This stuff inspires the hell out of me, to think of these books that meant a lot to people, right? That meant so much, that were so popular that the most successful lawyer in Rome could say, well, you know, it's like Ennius says, you guys know, right? No, no one knows. If you didn't say that at that exact moment in your case against Verres, then we would not know anything that he said, right? So that sort of thing, the retrieval of lost texts, which plays directly into the theme of the book, right? Of stories lost, right? And so a lot of that went in. I mean, my reading diet for the most part is literature and translation. That's what that's my beat. I'm always trying to make myself read other stuff. Right now I'm doing E.T.A. Hoffman, who's one of the early ghost story writers. I have a broad diet, but literature and translation is my main thing, especially right now, Croatian literature.
Which is amazing. And, you know, I feel like you need to curate a reading list for all of us. And, you know, if we were in politics and prose right now, you'd just be like taking us down all the aisles many of us ignore at our own peril. So I love it. Like, walk us through the classics, walk us through world literature.
Dasa Drindich. If you haven't done Dasa Drindich, she's really
there you go.
From New Directions. It's DRNDIC. But
you know, John, I just have to say, like, what you're not saying is true crime and horror, which obviously is the, like, you know, this is what this book is being talked about as. And I think we're going to get into some of the complexities of that. But, you know, do you read it at all? Was it just incidental to this book? Kind of what's going on with those genres in relationship to the kind of the most obvious, or the like first layer of the plot of this book?
So I don't really read much true crime now, but I was a young goth, you know, and when I was 19 and 20, I've always had this sort of attraction repulsion thing to extreme violence, you know, and to things that repulse me, right? I had no stomach for it when I was younger. I would like when I was 8, I would. The things, I know how this happened. There was a girl named Elaine who I was playing with all the time when I was 7, and I really just thought she was the greatest thing in the world. And we're talking about books, and she said, well, you know what I don't like is violence. And I'm the sort of person who, if I'm talking to somebody I'm infatuated with and they say they don't like something, then I also don't like it, you know. And I was 7 years old. I said, "Oh yeah, I know, Elaine, you're right. Violence is terrible." I didn't even know what she meant, you know. So she was a year older than me, uh, but uh, but then I learned what she meant, and I sort of had already developed a reaction formation to not enjoy it. But as soon as I say to myself I don't like something, I'm also attracted to it. You know, I want to know more about that. So so and yeah, and there's also stuff, having lived in a physically violent environment, you sort of want at some point to start mastering that. And one way you do that is by engaging art that is violent, right? And so I got pretty into splatter movies and reading books about, you know, the Zodiac book, Gray Smith's Zodiac book, Edmund Ewell Kemper. There's a book about this horrible serial killer called Edmund Ewell Kemper, who had like an IQ of 200. He's an interesting guy to read about. And I did glut myself on that stuff in the mid 80s, right? But I had enough. And you do sort of, you have enough of that at some point. But then early on in writing this book, I started dipping my toes in the water again and started listening to some of the podcasts. And those raised for me questions about what are people getting out of this, right? And there's one thing, when people write horror stories in the 18th and 19th century, they always justify themselves. They always say, well, you know, this is a terrible story, but I'm telling it to you because people need to know that things like this happen. And what do they really mean? What they really mean is, I get off on telling you this story. I can't wait to tell you this. It's really gross. You won't even believe, right? But they don't want to say that. They have all these Victorian or post-Victorian conventions, right? But I think those are serious questions. It's like, what do you get out of, what's the author getting out of telling you the story? What are you getting out of reading it? Let's be honest about it, you know. Because for so long, also the horror comics of the 50s used to always justify themselves by saying, you know, this is a cautionary tale. We're presenting this story, you know, to keep people away from bad stuff. But it's not the case. It's like most writers who write about something are writing about it because they enjoy it, you know. It occupies sort of, it shares space with the notion of ironic listening. When people say they're watching or listening to something, you know, because it's so bad it's good, you like it. That's actually what it is.
Yeah,
you
right.
Like it. Right? If you do something, the probability is that you enjoy it, right? And so, not that enjoyment isn't complex, but yeah. So I used to read true crime. I decided it was kind of gross, right? But I still, you know, I still have a little of that. I will say, people do ask you what parenthood changes, and my stomach for hearing about violence done to human beings, actual real ones, dropped precipitously after I became a parent. It was a pretty visceral thing.
Yeah, I appreciate your drawing already like a lot of fine distinctions. And for a little bit, I felt like I was listening to like the modern Auden. Like Auden has this great essay, The Guilty Vicarage, about like what's up with detective fiction and why he loves it and why it's moralizing and theologically complicated. But you just drew a distinction between true crime about real people and real violence that happened to them, and the kind of fictional violence of, you know, Arthurian legend or something like that, something
Right.
from the deep past that's mythological. And
I think that's a real difference. I
yeah,
think, you know, if I'm telling you a story, it may be horrifying, and there's some writers who are so good at it that you can't stand to read them, right? But when there's real people's lives involved, it is different. It's different, right?
yeah, and that's where I think, like, you know, this book is operating in those genres, but it's obviously operating in a sophisticated critique of them, you know, and that's what's going on with some of the meta storytelling and some of the ethical infrastructure. And I just wonder, can you tell us kind of, you know, when you started writing, did you know how you felt about the genre, or what you were trying to get at, or the kind of ethical critique you were trying to level? When you mentioned the castle laws or stand your ground laws earlier, there's a lot of omnidirectional critique of, you know, that of revenge culture, of stand your ground laws, you know, of true crime and the kind of proliferation of violent stories, or the way that, you know, fictionalizing them can make things even more complicated, because River's Edge is in this book, and
Right.
there's a reference to that kind of, you know, meta storytelling in that way too. So, you know, did you know what you thought? Did you already, was there another kind of set of, you know, note cards that was like, this is what's wrong with true crime, these are the things I want to talk about? Or did it emerge as you explored the story you were telling?
No, for the most part, I've said this a few times, so it feels like a shtick, but it's true. It's like I don't you know, I mentioned Trollope earlier. Trollope knows where he stands when he starts writing a book. He's got a point he's going to make, and he makes it. But I learn what I think through the writing, right? I don't have if I already have an opinion about something, then I'm not interested enough in it to write about it, you know. So like when Gage is a true crime writer, that's because the first question I ask myself when I sit down to write is, here's my character, how does he pay his rent? You know, and like, and I pick a job, you know, I just find something interesting, and all that comes together in sort of a way that's hard to track. But yeah, so I didn't really know how I felt, and I actually learned how I felt as I told the stories, and started to say, well, how do I feel about this guy now that he's doing this thing? You know, it's like when I came up with his process for inhabiting a house and recreating the scene, I was like, well, what, you know, you're recreating something that was terrible. You know, for what purpose? You know, what he, for those of you who haven't read the book, he inhabits a house where a crime took place, and he tries to make the house look like it looked when the crime took place, right? Not at the moment of the crime, but he tries to recreate this space. And I sort of thought about the sort of unelidable distance between telling a story and the object of the story, right? It's like, and this is again some dense theoretical stuff that actually doesn't read dense and theoretical usually once you get to it, but like, you know, but there's this distance between the thing you're talking about and the thing itself, right? And this is like, you know, critical theory stuff. I can say my phone, my phone, my phone, but unless you're holding my phone, you don't have the phone, right? You have the idea, right? But the same thing happens with stories, but their reference are people and their lives, real lived experience stuff, right? And who has the standing to tell those stories is sort of the question I sort of landed on.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, what I appreciated too is it's so easy to just say, well, this is about true crime. This is one problematic genre. And if we could only solve that. But what I love about this book is as it opens up, it's partly about exploitation in the real estate industry. And it's about, you know, it's about exploitation in the pornography industry because we inhabit this, you know, porn store. It's not just, oh, journalists are terrible. There's one variety of terribleness and exploitation. It's like, the nature of human relationships can be exploitative, no matter what you do, no matter where you are. And I wonder, again, is that something that emerged for you? Or did you know going in, like, this is your view, this is your anthropology, or this is your view of human relations? And so no matter who you're writing about, you kind of find your way to those questions? Or, you know, or is it just like, okay, pornography bugs you, so you wanted to write about that too? Like you've been listening to true crime podcasts and, you know, consuming pornography, therefore they both became parts of the book. Like, how does it work? Where does it come from? And, you know, how schematic is it?
Can I ask you, I'm interested by a part of your question. So when a lot of the book takes place in a porn store, right? And at one point, I mean, I have to describe the stuff that's in there. But did it seem to you that the author, me, was troubled by this?
I mean, it's an interesting question because I think one of the extremely wonderful things about this book is like the question of who is narrating is a problem within the text, and it's a problem external to the text too. And I never assume that the voice of any given narrator is John's voice, or, you know, to your point, in the kind of 19th century novel way, I did not imagine that John was now expanding on his sermon. You know, that these are his politics playing out in any given structure. So no, I mean, for one thing, there's like a really fantastic riff on pornography titles, which seems to me like the kind of linguistic play of like, I want to experiment with Middle English and see how my voice sounds in that register. So no, I mean, I never assume that, I think that's such a facile way of reading, to assume that anything you read on the page is what the author thinks about any given
Right, of course.
But, you know, on the other hand, you invented the entire history for this building. It could have just been another VHS store, right? You know, it could have been a Blockbuster Video, but you choose to have it move through time in this really interesting way.
Yeah. So I mean, you're very right that in making the list of the titles and stuff, you know, there's a bunch of stuff going on with that. And part of it is like one of my favorite writers is William Gass, right? And William Gass is another guy who, like, he's thinking about deep theoretical stuff, but God, once he makes a list, it's usually like being just punched in the jaw over and over again. You know, it's like so amazing. And he loves lists. He loves nothing more than lists. So, but I also wanted, you know, if I say porn store, if anybody says porn store, you have an idea, right? But those places which are largely, you know, there's not the internet changed that whole economy, right? And there's volumes written and scholarly work done on what those places were. They meant many different things depending on where they were, but the shock of the interior of one of those places is really hard to imagine especially in the pre-internet age, where right now, you have to work to avoid seeing anything explicit in your daily life, right? It's like you'd have to actually, but back in the day, people would have to seek these out, and to step into one was to be confronted with just this absolute wall of stuff that generally you weren't seeing anywhere at all, right? And I was pretty interested by that, and I wanted this litany of titles which I should say was originally much longer, and my editor Sean McDonald, I could feel him like trying to be delicate, because authors will dig their heels in if they get over edited, right? And they say, I feel that the list it's a little long. What do you mean? I said, no, I said it's a lot. I think it gets it. I said, oh, no, but I want it to be completely overwhelming. He said, I think it will be overwhelming if it's shorter. But I don't know if I've answered your question there, but what was the jumping off point?
Well, I was just wondering about, again, I think there's just like a narrow way of saying, well, this is a book about true crime, when it feels so obviously about so many other kinds of industries and, kinds of work and just different ways that humans relate to each other. It's not just journalists or novelists. There's all, again, the realtors and the role that like real estate plays in the book. And that I just was wondering, when you kind of look around the world, does it feel like every kind of work is exploitative and that's what this novel is about? Or does it just feel like these are the industries that caught your attention and the way they interact in the story is this way?
I mean, I feel almost guilty saying like, well, part of why I write about work stuff is because when I'm writing any character, the first question I have about them is how they make rent, right?
What
How
they
they
do
eat.
for a living?
Right?
Yeah.
I cannot imagine writing a character who doesn't have a job, right? Or if I did, then I have to say where they live and how cold they are at night and so forth, and so I give them a job first, right? That's the first thing with any character is I mean, they get a name first and then they get a job, right? And so, but so I mean, what's funny is like, I mean, I think it's probably true that labor is exploitation, but I also love to work, right? And I love having a job, and I can't stand to not be working, right? I don't want to. I don't seek leisure. I seek to be busy, and I have Quaker attitudes about that. It's like I think work is something we do, right? I'm not on the side of. I mean, I think the nature of how our labor gets deployed for the profit of others is certainly exploitative, but I don't think exploitation is inherent in labor, right? I think, but I mean, I also don't know that I have the political chops to say that.
Well, we started with praising the politics and prose union, so I don't think anyone's going to misunderstand your love of work, and nor are they going to.
I mean? It's like, I mean, you're right that like Didion's line, writers are always selling somebody out. Well, if Didion's right, then like, especially if you have a childish mind like mine, they go, well, then they shouldn't write. Well, no, I mean, it's a terrible conclusion, right? Of course they should.
Right.
I mean, the thing is, I think in any, I would say all human relationships are fraught with the potential for ill will and bad feeling, right? And the only way to mitigate any of those relationships, any and all of them, is consciousness, right? Now that's cold comfort to people who like solutions, but I don't like solutions. I only like questions, right? I only like sort of a dense field, so I sort of feel like when the questions are present, when they've been posed and are sort of dancing around there, either in the background or the foreground, it mitigates any of the potential harm or grief that can come from these fraught relationships.
Yeah, I think that's really beautifully put. And I'm going to go to audience questions in just 1 minute, but
I'm going to hit the coffee maker like I threatened to.
Yeah, go ahead. You do that while I ask this one. This is the intermission, folks. If you want to like grab a coffee or a glass of wine or whatever you need to do, John's making coffee so we can stay awake with us. But I just wanted to say, like, thank God you love work, because we love your work. And so we want you to like make more of it, more novels, more songs, more everything. But I do just feel like, you know, I've heard you answer this question before, but do it again for us. And I wonder if it's dynamic in some way that changes. But I just think it's incredible. Like, you have this huge imagination and it expresses itself in so many different forms. And, you know, tell us about what it's like. Do the novels just feel like this other gear you go into? Does songwriting feel different? You know, I've read some poets on their novels like Plath or John Berryman, like people who are able to move between registers, but just talk to us about that and kind of how you move around the very different kinds of work that you do.
Well, they're completely discrete is the thing. I don't, I mean, a song, for one thing, I've been writing songs for so long that the process is pretty, you know, I finish it in a day, right? If I start a song at 8, it's usually done by noon, right? Or earlier. Whereas a book is a thing you live with, right? You keep returning to it. It's I mean, so much that has to do with the fact that I didn't start writing books until about 10 years ago, and I've been writing songs for closer to 25 or 30, right? So, but the other thing is like, it's funny. It's like, I don't want to say the songs are smaller because actually the compression of a song allows you a different style of infinity than within a book. I mean, a book is almost like a, like a puzzle, right? That you're trying to like a jigsaw puzzle that you're trying to make a whole bunch of edges articulate in a way that's coherent, right? And if there's a missing piece, then you want to draw attention to it, right? That's another thing you can do. But there's still an alleged hole, right? Whereas songs are these amazing little gems that, you know, I mean, really much like a here's a piece of turquoise, right? And it's just a rock, right? But the longer you look at it, the more you notice all these crevices that have been put there over the course of the years and so forth. And you shape and you wonder, well, did it come from a larger piece? You don't even really know how turquoise is formed. Songs are like that, right? That they're these small things that don't really seem like much. And the closer you look at them, the more they seem to give. And that's why we return to them more than we return to books, I think. Like, we might read a book a few times, but you listen to a song hundreds of times, right? It's like it keeps giving up more stuff. Part of that also has to do with the fact that, I mean, a song is writing lyrics, yes, but melody, but rhythm, right? And if you're writing it with other musicians or playing with it, then there's interplay. Not with a novel, the interplay is all these gears inside your one person's brain, right? And with a song, there's it's like, you know, it's the reason that some people think opera is the most superior form is that it brings together drama and poetry and music and dance and costume, and all these amazing things are present in a single operatic space, right? For me, the same is true of songs, that like a song brings together poetry and rhythm and melody and tone and narrative, depending on what. I mean, you have so many choices about how to tell a song. It doesn't have to be a story. It can be any, mine usually are, but like, you know, songs have an infinity in them, right? That means you would think that would be daunting, but it's not. It means that you get to do whatever you like. You're in the presence of a space of infinite play, right? And so, you know, whereas with a novel, you are closing off your infinities as you go, right? You're trying to limit it. You are trying to contain it. We're really trying to sort of express this infinite space in a small space. And it's really, that's why songs are miracles, you know. I hope I'm not cutting out too much. That it says your internet connection is unstable. It says on my screen.
Actually, I mean, you paused for one like really operatic moment, so I think it was a good one to freeze on.
It's good.
But you've answered a couple of these questions, but I'm going to do, this is like a little bit of a rapid fire one. Do you have any rituals you complete before sitting down to write? You obviously love it. How do you get yourself in the zone? What do you do? What does that look like for you?
You know, I don't think that I do, but I suspect that maybe if people watched me, like if you ask my wife, she might say, "Oh no, he always does this." So, but I don't really know. You know, I pace a bit when I'm writing prose. When I get to the office, I usually pace around a bit and I look at the books on my bookshelves, and I probably play some music, and I probably pick up a piece of a rock and I rub it with my thumb for a while, and sit there talking out loud. You know, I'll do a little like, what are we doing today? So Gage what's he doing? He has to sit on the floor. you have to, and I might even address him during, you have to sit on the floor, man. You have to get down on the floor. And I might do stuff like that, but there's nothing set in stone, you know. I mean, I might also text a friend a lot, you know. And the one thing I do that I know I do, and the things I finished the book a good number of months ago, so I haven't written in a while, but the one thing I always do is I look at what I wrote last. Right? See, where was I last? Because I can't remember. When I stand up from it, it vanishes into this weird velvety place. And so I sit down and I open up where I last was. I just go to recent documents, right? And I can see what the last one was. I open it up and I go, oh, wow. Because it always feels like somebody else did it, you know? And I go, okay. And then often, without thinking about it, I'll start fixing the parts that seem terrible to me. I'll go, wow, so that seemed good to you yesterday, huh? You must have been lost because that's a terrible sentence. And I'll fix the bad sentences and I'll that's much better. That's better. Okay, that's pretty good. And then that puts me back in it, right? It's like then I slip back into the stream.
I think that's Didion-esque. If I remember, she was always like retyping the full manuscript to kind of get to where she had gotten before. So I love that. Here's another kind of maybe easy one for you. Someone wants to know about the setting of this novel. So did you choose it because of River's Edge, or what are we doing in California, and when did you decide on the setting?
So I lived in Milpitas. It's that part 7 is true. When John Darnielle is narrating in part 7, I lived there when I was a kid. So I had that, and when the River's Edge case, when the Marcy Conrad case broke, like I was a guy who had used to live there, and I was like, wow, would I have known these kids? So that was like that was my relationship with the case. But the other thing is, this book didn't always take place where it takes place. It was in North Carolina when I started writing it, right? And over the course of writing it, I wound up wanting to move it to California, and when I did that, it cracked it open for me. It's like so I had a lot more material. I've lived in North Carolina longer than I've lived in any one place continuously, but I was a child in California, and the places where you were a child have a little mystical power that I think places you move to is harder to come by, you know. And so when I moved it across the country, it partly to make people's flights shorter and stuff, some basic plotting stuff, it really opened it up for me, you know. And I'm not quite sure why, but once I said, no, it's Milpitas, it's like, that's, I just had a lot of thoughts about that, you know. And I think it also got me closer to San Luis Obispo, because I also lived there as a child.
Gotcha. It's interesting because that is kind of embedded in this novel. There's this sense of like what happens in childhood is indelible and has an effect on us. But so I've got like another, just like two kind of yes or no or kind of easy questions. One is, did you read Daniel Mendelssohn's Three Rings, A Tale of Exile, Narrative, and Fate? That's a yes or no question because this person thinks you might be interested in what he has to say about structure. So you're shaking your head no?
I have not, no.
That's a no. Okay. Someone else wants to know, does Wolf and White Van, so obviously everybody here tonight's going to read Devil House. They're going to love it. Let's go to some of your earlier novels. They want to know, did Wolf and White Van have an architectural inspiration too? Did it work? Did it come to you the same way that Devil House did?
Well, I mean, it was a much simpler one. I wanted it to be backwards, right? I wanted it to go backwards to a moment, right? And the coffee is sizzling something fierce. But yeah, so the only structure was supposed to go backwards, which turned out to be way more complicated than I thought it would be, right? Because you have to keep going and explaining stuff. If you're moving backwards from a moment, you can't do it in a straight line. Or maybe you can, but I was unable to. And like toward the end of editing that book, I was having to physically cut the pieces of the manuscript. You know how I write in these sections where these double line breaks, right? And so I was having to sit down with the manuscript and cut out parts and move them around to make them work in a way where the backwards movement would be preserved and coherent. And I remember a very particular day in which chapter 11 became chapter 2, and it worked, right? I was like, oh, okay, yeah, no, this doesn't belong there. It goes here, and you make the following changes to make it clear that that's, and it was quite wild. Universal Harvester, I do not remember how the structure got built. It's got a quartet structure, but yeah, that one, yeah, I'm not sure how that one wound up with its structure.
It actually sounds like you live in a Nolan Brothers film. I'm like amazed by the way time works in John's universe. So you'll really have to like bring us along for a day in the life of John sometime.
My therapist once alluded to my sense of time being perhaps a little different.
It's novelistic. I love it. This is another kind of yes, no, someone who has obviously already read the book and loves it. They want to know, Gage is buying ephemera on eBay, this true crime stuff for like
Right.
props for writing. This person wants to know if that's do people actually do that? Do you do that? And where did you get that detail?
So
I feel like I'm trying to be careful. I know we talked about your books are infinitely spoilable. They're so enjoyable. Yeah. They operate in suspense. So I'm trying to pick things that won't spoil it for people who haven't read.
No, that's not a spoiler, I don't think. So I'm pretty certain people buy true crime artifacts on eBay. I didn't look it up, but I know that people used to buy John Wayne Gacy paintings, right? Mm-hmm. He's a child murderer from Illinois, and he started painting pictures in prison, and people would buy those and use them as album cover art and stuff. Mm-hmm. I was thinking of the relics of saints, right? Was something that figured in that. And also just in the fact that you can buy pretty much anything, pretty much anything's out there. What I did buy when I was researching this was old maps of Milpitas, and I got a patch from a factory in Milpitas that I'm going to have sewn onto a jacket at some point. So I got a number of artifacts like that, but the true crime stuff, I'm certain that stuff is out there. I didn't even need to check. Because it's that's part of, and this plays into stuff I don't talk about in the book, but like one of my more conservative than most of my politics takes is that I sort of feel like the death of privacy has been catastrophic for people, right? And that like one of my shticks that people always get upset with me about is like, if an author dies, if they didn't leave explicit directions as to what they want published, then I don't think any of it should be published, right? And for this reason, I don't read Franz Kafka, because he asked his friend to destroy his stuff. And his friend said, "Oh no, I know better than you. You're crazy. I'm going to publish your stuff." Right. And then people argue about this, say, "Oh, well, he said that before he changed his mind." Like, look, the last thing he said was burn it, Max. And Max didn't burn it, right? I find that personally grieving, right? The notion of somebody publishing something for me, what happens to me? Like if I let a demo get out, then people will upload it and say, "Well, John says this isn't any good, but I think it's a good one." I hate that. And so when I think about people buying ephemera on eBay, part of me is like, things deserve their privacy. Things that want oblivion should be granted oblivion, right? And this is something it's an emotional question for me. Some of this for basic reasons. Like, I think the writing that I have done that I didn't feel was worth sharing, I hope no one ever sees it. So, and the idea that after I'm dead, then people would comb through it, is horrible to me. And so, but yeah, that's some stuff I thought about, but I didn't actually buy any true crime stuff. No.
I now wish we had a whole nother hour for like posthumous publication and to talk about Kafka and any number of artists whose work has like come out, but possibly that's just your next novel. You're going to do like the aspirin papers of like somebody whose work was published. There was someone who wanted to shout out, there you are talking about kind of these conservative impulses, someone who wanted to shout out your support for reproductive freedom. And we've talked about your support of unionizing. So that's like someone else's question I didn't quite get to, but it's really beautiful to hear you talk about artistry and ephemerality. And I feel like you're just such a sophisticated thinker. And I know we've barely scratched the surface of these questions. I mean, we could just take these audience questions all night, but this is in the kind of vein of you're a genius and tell us what it's like to be a genius. Someone wants to know, was it odd to write yourself in a fictional narrative? So we're going to go really meta. It's going to make your therapist happy. Forget time. Talk to us about narratology and who you are in this novel, because we've just enjoyed your presence. Like, far from ephemeral, here you are on our screens in our living rooms, like joining us tonight. But what was it like to kind of write yourself in, and how did that work?
So it was interesting because that was a late solution. I was never sure what part 7 was going to be. Like, I knew from outlining the books, like part 7 will also be in the first person. That was all I had. Right. I didn't, and my assumption was it would be by Gage, right? When I got there, I wasn't satisfied. I think I probably wrote 10 or 20,000 words where it was Gage, because there's a lot of stuff I wrote and threw away, and the course is like a lot. But it's part 5 was originally completely different. I wrote, that was like 30,000 words I had to throw away. So, but I came up with something better. Once I got to part 7, I do remember going, okay, what am I going to do? And as you might imagine, when I finished part 6, it was pretty emotional, and I wanted to breathe for a week or so, let it rest. And then when I came back, I said, okay, well, what's going to happen here? And I had just been to California, and I got this idea. It's like, what if it's me? What if I go to California and I meet Gage? What if I do that? Right? I said to myself, and that's what happens, right? And so, and that was pretty. Like I say, one thing that's great about outlining is you transgress, right? And when you do it, if you overdo it, obviously, then your outline's meaningless. But if you really, take your outline as something, that you intend to follow, once you find yourself having a significant difference with it and go, no, I think I'm going to do this instead, right? That transgression can really be a very eruptive moment, right?
Mm. Well, I will keep asking these, but I'm like now looking into our friends at Politics and Prose to make sure the Zoom isn't just going to like flicker out and end. But, there are some other questions here. This might just be fun to like give us, I don't want to spoil things for people because it's just such a fun book to read and propulsive. So kind of a general question here. How does research play into your process? And relatedly, any classics that you think are overlooked or misunderstood, which I think might fall into the research category because you're looking to the past and recovering things and you have this rich reading life?
Well, for research, it's funny because like I didn't have internet in my office in either of the offices that I was writing in, so I had to be using my phone if I was doing research, which is great. But I also I try not to think of what I'm doing as research because the term research has been so terribly degraded in the past 5 years, where people, people who don't want to get a vaccine say they did their research. It's like, no, you did your confirmation bias. It's like, but what I do is I do tend to go online. I wish I had access to the Duke Library and was able to really make it work. But I do a fair bit of going to city websites and I also look for what's it called? Not City Web. There's a thing. It basically it's a proto next door local news. It's called like City Web or something. I can't remember what it's called. But it winds up having nested threads about stuff that's local, right, to small places, right? I found a lot of Milpitas discussion on some of these. And this is stuff that's sort of missing from the broader social internet because we now are always talking across long distances. But when you can find a conversation that's local, locality is really important to me, right? I think it's important to everybody. I think that your neighborhood, your town is important, and in understanding a place, you need to understand what it is to the people there before you need to think about outside perspectives, right? And so when I'm digging around on the internet, what I'm trying to find is localized perspectives first and foremost.
Yeah, that's really great. So I think, again, I can kind of keep doing this. I'm like truly waiting for them to like give us the like, okay to go. Right. Wait, I've now gotten the message that says it's okay to go over. Great. I really thought we were going to just
no, we can do whatever. I have a whole pot of coffee.
The ether. I know, John, it's really generous of you. You were explaining you're in a hotel to kind of keep your family life private. So we really appreciate you caffeinating and like staying up all night with us, which is read your book.
I would love to share the kids with you, but we actually would not get any talking done. They would go off.
Let's see. So, all right, here's a really tricky one. And, this is going to take us back to that like ethics of consumption conversation. Someone wants to know, you mentioned people consume content because they like it or they're getting something out of it. What do you think people are getting out of true crime podcasts and that sort of content?
I'm hoping there aren't any major true crime hounds in the chat at the moment. But I think there's a lot of voyeurism in there. We were talking about this the other night. I think one thing is the same thing that you get out of horror sometimes, which people don't like to say it, but I think often you hear a horrible story and deep down in your gut you go, God, I'm glad that's not me. I'm glad that's not my life. The same reason why when we obsess about other people's drama in our lives, like you hear somebody who's made a complete mess of their marriage, you go, man, what, you got my share of problems, but wow, those guys, they messed up, you know. And I think true crime is there's a fair bit of that, of feeling fortunate about your own station, right? But there's also you know, leering at a car crash, you know, just the which is not, there's no good way to spin that if we had public executions, people would go, right? Those of us who are vigorously anti-death penalty like to imagine that that would result in more people opposing the death penalty, but it's not true, right? We know from France, you know, that if you have a guillotine, people will show up and they'll sell donuts at the guillotine. It's like, and I think a lot of true crime appreciation is reflects a baser impulse that I don't put myself above, right? I watch gore movies, I watch splattered movies. I don't watch them for any noble reasons. I'm not watching them, you know, to unpack, to have sophisticated theoretical takes on, though I have those also, just because I am who I am, right? But I'm in fact watching them for the thrill, right, of the bloodshed, right? Which is basic and human, right? It's not something you have to be ashamed of, but it is something I think, you know, we should be honest why we're, I said this earlier, like, when you're enjoying something, I think it's good to be in touch with why you're enjoying it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Another way of talking about your novels is they often are preoccupied with what some people would call subcultures. So true crime, gaming, this sort of thing. And it's very interesting instead to think of them as mainstream cultures. You know, obviously they are in a certain sense. Or, you know, you talked about being a goth as a young person, like goth culture is presented as marginal when in fact it represents a huge swath of American culture. So it's interesting, right, to think of these as big conversations, not marginal or small ones. Someone wants to know, this is maybe another like yes, no, or goes to your kind of like just omnivorous talent. They want to know if you think Devil House would work in a screen adaptation, and are you going to write it?
So I don't have any screenwriting chops. I don't think, this is one of my shticks, is like, if I tried to write a screenplay, I think it'd be a catastrophe. I've never tried before. So my first one would probably be bad, right? So, you know, it would take me 10 or 20 years, then I could maybe do it. But I don't think, I don't think that'd be my lookout. People, the thing is, when a book announces, if it's getting any press, often people immediately start asking about film rights and stuff. I mean, I'd be open to it, totally. But I'm always a little leery. I mean, I have these dumb ideas about things having their own spot, about a book being enough. Is it, you know, like the way that everything gets a sequel, if it's at all successful, will always depress me a little bit. You know, that I like discrete things. I like small things. You know. Even though the best Frankenstein movie is Bride of Frankenstein, so by far. So, but yeah, I mean, be open to it. I don't watch a lot of movies or TV or anything, so I don't know. But I mean, the thing is, yeah, people have asked about every book I've written so far about whether about making movies, and some of them, you know, the Wolf and White Van screenplay has gone to the screenwriters lab at Sundance, and I expect it'll get made at some point. But I'm a book person. That's where I'm always thinking first.
Well, since we've already decided your next novel is like the aspirin papers on steroids about posthumous publication, I'm going to ask you this, but remember, I've already decided what your next novel is. This is someone who wants
I like this though, because we've talked about how I like to be told what to do.
And I'm giving you your marching.
Write my outline.
Yes, you come up with the outline. We'll talk about it later. But this person wants to know, and this is fun because you brought up all of the Arthurian legends. They're asking if you've thought about other genres for future books, like fantasy or sci-fi. Did you hear that?
Sorry, you said Arthurian legends and then you froze.
So they wanted to know if you've thought about future books, genres like fantasy or sci-fi. Are you going to be writing the Once and Future King next, or do you have any of those in mind?
No, because I've already done. I try not to repeat myself, right? Even though I think most of the theoretical writers I like to read tend to believe you're gonna repeat yourself, which sort of frees you to not worry about what you're writing about, you know. And so, but no, I am always thinking about my next thing. I usually start writing it while the last one's in edit. Like I started writing Devil House when Universal Harvester, I was waiting to hear from my editor, right? So I start writing something else because I've been writing every day for months. With this, it didn't happen that way because the book was so big. There was so much more to do. But I have something now that I'm kicking around, and I never talk about work in progress any more than that.
All right. Well, we will leave it at that. So we don't pry into your privacy, which, as you say, is like much to be mourned these days. And we appreciate you opening up about your process and kind of how this book came together. I think we should probably, speaking of Union Shop, like let these guys go to bed and enjoy the snow. But I want to give you the
fill up my shtick though to complicate the thing that I say about about Kafka, right? Well, if it weren't for a betrayal of Emily Dickinson's wishes, we wouldn't have Emily Dickinson, right? And I wouldn't trade Emily Dickinson for anything, like not for my own theoretical concerns or anything, and that's the one that always stops me is like, I feel intensely the betrayal of Franz Kafka by Max Brod, even though Max Brod was a great person, a great human being, right? But when I think of Emily Dickinson, I go, oh no matter what, you must betray her wishes. You must publish her work. She doesn't know. And so, or she does know and has some weird idea that you just got to tell her, no, I'm publishing your poems. That's what it is. And so yeah, it's like, I'm not actually as pure as my positions make it sound in these questions.
It's just endlessly complex. I love it. And what a beautiful thought. I mean, those of us who are like here in the general DC area are like watching it sift from leaden sieves right now. There's like this beautiful snowfall, kind of a magical night to be talking to you. And I just want to thank you again. It's a real pleasure. And, again, I know John joins me in saying you can buy this book anywhere. You definitely have to buy it. Buy it from Politics and Prose. They made this night possible. They make a lot of magical nights possible. They sustain the future Emily Dickinsons by creating spaces like this. So please buy John's book from them. You have a lot of choices, but great bookshop and great booksellers. And I'll turn it back over to them, or John, if you have anything else you want to say before we close out.
Well, I would say if you have already bought the book, but you're here, then buy a different book from Politics and Prose. You could buy any number of books. So I mean, you could become like me and just have more books than you will ever finish reading. And it's very liberating to have that many books, because then you sort of live in a world of possibility. But I mean, independent bookstores are so important to me. I mean, I know this sounds sort of like a PBS pitch or whatever, but it's like, I get to tour, to do book tours, and when I'm on tour as a musician, you get to go into more and more bookstores around the world, around the country, and it not only does it never get old, it just always reminds you, it's like bookstores are the best, really, that the world has to offer. It's like, because it has worlds within worlds within worlds. So if you already have the book, buy something in Politics and Prose anyway. I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I really want this night to keep going, but I am getting sleepy. But I do get to ask the last question from both of you. John, you already kind of talked about this earlier, but like you said, we are a bookstore. So what are you guys both reading now, and what would you want to suggest to our readers? Either of you can start.
Go ahead.
I'm sure.
Well, I would be remiss. You guys are also selling signed copies of my wife's book, which is behind me because she's been on like endless book tour like John. It's Catherine Schultz, and she wrote a beautiful book about her father who passed away, and a little bit about our married life. But I love Catherine's book, and it's made me think about memoirs. So the other one I'll shout out, and John, you might know it. It's not down in the Carolinas. He was from rural Georgia, but Penguin is about to republish Harry Cruz's memoir about his childhood. And it's just this extraordinary thing. I'm writing about it for the magazine. And, they're two very different memoirs, but, two gifted writers. So if you pick up Catherine's book, they're selling signed copies, but Harry Cruz has passed. So he's not going to be around to talk about it, but it's a real slice of Americana and just a really beautiful book about a very complicated place. So Harry Cruz's memoir or Catherine's book would be the two I'd love to recommend to folks tonight.
So it's it's funny because I don't do a lot of memoirs, but when you say memoir, then I think, well, the one person I got into last year who does nothing but memoirs is Annie Ernaux, who I'll warn you, I'll warn everybody, I don't really think of myself as that triggerable. And I don't really talk a lot about having had some weird eating stuff in my past. But when she has an affair with a counselor at a camp, where she's a counselor and some much older man, and then she gets into some disordered eating patterns, and it was intensely triggering. I was on tour and I could not believe. But the thing is, for me, when a book does that to me, I'm sort of in a sort of dislocated ecstasy. It's like it was really. So she does almost nothing. There was a book was called A Girl's Story. She has another one called A Woman's Story. She has almost nothing but memoirs. They're all quite brief, and she is an absolute. We're mourning Joan Didion all together. Well, for the line for the sentence, this is translated literature, so I can't speak to how it reads in French. But my God, Annie Ernaux is something else. I don't know what the Nobel people are looking for, but I'm scooping her stuff up like drinking it like water. It's so good. She's.
I think John froze. He might be like frozen in perpetuity. We'll give him the chance to come back.
Oh no!
Oh gosh, we should tell everybody we were maybe going to do this over chat because John was going to type his answers with the internet at the hotel where he is. Which normally, John, I have to say it's my internet on the Eastern Shore that's conking out and embarrassing everyone. So I'm actually I feel like it's a gift to me that my internet is not frozen. So thank you. That I get to enjoy your company. You get to make me feel a little bit better about my internet.
Wow. This is such a silly place to end for wonderful talk. But thank you everyone for coming. Thank you. We appreciate you here, and your patronage is what enables us to bring you such amazing conversations like this. And you can continue to support the bookstore by using the link in the chat to purchase John's twisty and turny new novel, Devil House. It's a beautiful story with some great typefaces. I love this design. I have not stopped talking about it. But anyway, don't forget to check our website for the most up-to-date listings, as we have an amazing list to choose from. And we do hope to see you all soon under much safer circumstances. John and Casey, thank you for sharing your stories with us. Thank you. You can find Lost and Found on our shelves as well. You can also find, any of John's other works. Casey's work is also with us. We got a whole range. So thank you to all of our friends here tonight. Stay safe and stay warm and stay well read. We will see you all next time. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot, John. You take care.
Yeah, Casey, what a pleasure to have met you. You're really an awesome interviewer, and it was a real pleasure talking to you.
Gosh, it was a lot of fun. I will self-interestedly tell you, I will definitely get in touch. We're sometimes driving through your neck of the woods because we love to drive, and we'll be headed south some. So, if you have to check into a hotel to see us, I'd love to meet you sometime. We're big fans.
Is everybody else still present, or is everybody else logged off?
Oh gosh, I have no idea. We're still live. All right, so Politics and Prose is telling me be careful with these invitations. Actually, it's be careful. But anyway, I love the book. That part they can hear, and I can't praise it enough. It's a lot of fun, and I didn't want to embarrass you, but I will with the dwindling crowds. I love Dwight's review, and I'm a big fan of Dwight Garner. And I'm so happy for you. This book is getting read by the people who should read it, and they're understanding it and loving it. I know he's written about your other stuff too, but congratulations. And I just hope the next few weeks are a lot of fun.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny. It's I'm used to getting attention as a singer, but it's intense. It's very intense when the book comes out because it takes so long for it to be born. It's it's an intense time. It's really cool. But at the same time, I have to fly to California on Sunday. I'm it's very uprooting.
Yeah, well, I can't imagine. I'm sure there's a real difference that lives in your head. It lives on the page, and just night after night to kind of open yourself up for these questions. It's a lot of fun. And I would also love, many months from now to actually just talk to you about the ending. I didn't dare get into it with everybody listening who hadn't had a chance to read it. But I think it's
Do
a lot
you
of
have
fun.
your chat open? Because I can send you an email address through the chat window.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll shoot you a note. But anyhow, we should let these folks go, and I should let you get back to bed. Although I guess you're caffeinated. Maybe you're going to go like write about Dickinson and Kafka and Hemingway and everybody else whose posthumous work has come out. I thought about this some. Did you read the book of you like Emily Dickinson? You probably like Elizabeth Bishop too. There's this huge controversy about Edgar Allan Poe and the jukebox and these like unpublished drafts and things. So it's a really rich question, and I hope you will write about it, if not in a novel, just some other way.
I get so cantankerous about it. I get very disagreeable sometimes talking about, like, with Salinger, is like everybody was talking about they should publish. It's like very clear he didn't want to publish anything. I'm ecstatic that they haven't, that if there's anything, but I also, the notion that there actually wasn't anything there, that he stopped writing, and that was the secret of this concept.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really into this question when it comes to Harper Lee, and there really is just kind of over and over again, what do we make of authors' wishes? And there's a lot of rich philosophical literature on this, not just for, authors, but all kinds of questions about posthumous harm for the dead. And, to me, it's the Ulysses problem of like, do you leave them tied on the mast or not? Yeah. Like people, it was so interesting to me when you were like, well, the final thing he said was not to publish it. And therefore that is the binding prospect. And it's just, I mean, look, you're obsessed with time and you think about chronology.
That's right.
What is the true self, and which self articulates the true intention is a really wonderful question.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, from a fairly obvious therapeutic angle, is like, I hear the one that I'm invested in, right? What I mean by that is that I don't want people to read the stuff I wrote that was bad. That's all, right? Like, really, I think we're so self-invested in most of our positions. Like we talk a good game about being interested in broader theoreticals, but generally it comes down to where's your angle, and mine is probably,
which is why the Bishop question is so rich, because obviously she's just a pure perfectionist. Really had such a high standard for the work that it's very clear what she thought merited kind of, a gift to the world, and what was private and what was procedural and what was helping her think through poems, not what was done. Compared to someone like Gage who just like revised and published again and again. But it's really fun. I just love seeing, I mean, there's so much passion in the songs, especially just kind of fun to watch you come alive on like one question like that, which I did not see it coming. It's great. That's why I hope these events are fun. Like tomorrow you'll get upset about reliquaries or something. And like, interlocutor tomorrow will just, have something else to say. But anyway, it's truly a lot of fun.
Really enjoy to meet you. Be in touch. You have my email. Shoot me a note so we can be in touch.
Totally. You have a great time. And I hope, everybody under the sun buys the book, and just all best wishes. And take care and have fun.
Same to you. Look me up. I'll be here most of the spring. So holler when you guys come south.
Excellent. All right. You take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.